Before Google, Yahoo, or Bing, there was Archie. No, not this one. This one. In 1990, a computer science student at McGill University created the first pre-web search engine. His name was Alan Emtage. At the time, finding files meant manually searching through endless directories, an incredibly tedious process, and Alan thought, there has to be a better way. So he created Archie, short for archive, a tool that automatically indexed file names across FTP sites, making them searchable in minutes instead of hours. Archie laid the groundwork for every search engine that came after, including the ones that we use billions of times every day. Alan Emtage didn't just create a tool. He created a foundation for how we access information in the digital age, and was one of the first to make it widely accessible. And most people have never heard his name, until now. We sat down with Alan Emtage to talk about innovation, the world pre-web, and the invention that changed everything. Thank you again for joining us today, Alan Emtage. Make sure I pronounce that correctly, right?
In Canada, yes, because of the French. That's how it typically is pronounced. But in Barbados, Emtage.
Emtage. Okay, good to know. Good to know. I'm going to ask you a series of questions just to figure out what was going through your mind when you created the first search engine ever. What the industry is like to you now as you're kind of just seeing everything happening. And we'll talk about also Black history in the industry and what we think can continue to happen as it progresses. So, ready to go?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so take us back to McGill in the early 90s. What problem were you personally trying to solve that led to Archie?
Well, personally / professionally, I worked for, I was a graduate student. I was doing my master's. I had done my bachelor's at McGill. I decided that I wasn't ready to come back home yet, and so I stayed on and to do a master's. As in parallel to doing my work as a student, I also joined this sysadmin, the system administrators for the School of Computer Science. So McGill has a separate school which is computer science, doing what sysadmins do, generally helping students and professors out with issues that they were having with the computers and stuff. But one of the things that I chose to be responsible for was to find information on the internet for the students and professors. So you have to remember, this is before the web. Web didn't come until 93. So you're talking 1988, 1989. And McGill had just gotten its first internet connection. Which I think we believe now that UBC, University of British Columbia, got there 2 weeks before us. So we weren't the first, we were the second in Canada. And that was a very, very, very slow connection. People wouldn't even recognize how slow it is these days. So 99.6 kilobits a second. So nowadays, if you don't have megabits coming in, we couldn't have done this. This would have been completely impossible, right? It was just too slow. So you kind of had to use that connection sparingly because it was very easy to overwhelm it. And so I'm a pack rat by disposition. I like collecting information, not things. I don't have shelves full of knickknacks or anything like that, but just in terms of information and stuff, digital stuff. I kind of was probably the best way of putting that. And so I became the person that they would come to find information, search for information on the internet and so on. So back then, the only way to do that was through what's called FTP servers. FTP is the file transfer protocol, and people would set up servers that they would then deposit programs or data or, name it, maps or anything in digital form, basically, onto these servers. And then you anonymously could come in. They were called anonymous FTP servers. So you didn't have to have an account. You just use the login FTP and it would let you in, right? And you have to remember back then, internet resources were very precious. Computing power was expensive. the idea that you would dedicate some of your resources for other random anonymous people out on the internet to use was actually kind of a unusual concept, right? Because you were giving up some of your precious resources to people who you had no connection to or no loyalty for, or they weren't paying you for anything. But people set these up, especially the big universities, MIT, Berkeley, the big computer science, IBM, the companies and the universities that had sort of resources or additional resources would set these things up. And then slowly other smaller places would as well. And so what I would do is when somebody came and asked me for a program, like I want a program that will do calculus, to pick a random example, right? I would try and then go to each one of these servers and I would hold it in my head. Well, this server has stuff to do with math, right? Or this server has stuff to do with biology, or this, and that would all be in my head. So I could quickly go to the place and I'd rifle through the files. And the only thing you really had was file names. So you would hope that the people would name the files in a way that you could actually figure out what was inside the file, because you couldn't, if you had to download everything before you figured out what it was, it sort of defeated the purpose, right? You would then be using up all these resources to find out that you spent, the last 3 hours downloading something and it wasn't what you wanted, right? So I, this stuff was all in my head. And at one point I thought, this is dumb. I'm doing all this stuff manually. I have a computer that can do this for me. So what I did is I set up a set of scripts that would wake up in the middle of the night when the connection wasn't being used, because it was 2 o'clock in the morning and nobody was using it. And it would go out to these FTP sites and it would get lists of all the files at each one of these FTP sites, and it would just bring it back and it would store the lists on my computer. So instead of going out to the servers, I could then search the local list of files that it had, right? Not the contents, but just the list of all the files that it had. And so I did that for months, and that was a efficient way of using the resources. And my boss at the time, who was also a student, knew I had this directory of files, and came in one day and said, "Hey, there's somebody online has just asked me if we know where some file is." And I was able to do my search through my little local list and say, "Oh yeah, if you go to this web server, if you go to this FTP server and you go to this directory, you'll find the file." So he posted that. It was on a public forum that the question was asked and he answered. And then other people started saying, "Well, can you find this file for me?" and so on. And we looked at one another and said, "This is dumb. Why are we doing this manually? This is what computers are for." But again, this is a situation in which you are giving resources to allow people access to that database themselves, or those lists would require us to provide that resource to all of these random people, right? And we didn't have any permission to do that, but we did it anyway. And so we built a little interface to allow people to come in and do the search for themselves rather than having humans in the loop. And that was the start of it. And then sort of basically by word of mouth, people figured out that there was this resource that you could find stuff on the internet, because at that point there was no concept of a search engine. There was no concept of the idea that there was a central location you could go to that you would be able to find things that were spread all over the internet. And so that was the genesis of the project.
Wow, you answered 3 questions in one, by the way. So thank you so much for that. Love the efficiency. You are an efficiency king. But why did you call it Archie?
Archie is just archive, FTP, anonymous FTP archive. It's
Wow.
Archie. It's archive without the V.
I don't know how. I did not clear. That's smart.
No, it was because, and the only reason that came about was that he walked, the same boss, Peter Deutsch is his name, came in and said, we got a name for this. We can't keep calling it this thing, it was a name. And I said, well, I don't know, archive, take out the V, it's Archie. Let's just call it Archie. It's a easy name and people can remember it. And it had nothing to do with the comic book character. But that didn't stop people who then came along and built successor projects to that, naming them Veronica and Jughead. And then they made up acronyms that fit that, very rodent oriented, said something, and that was Veronica, and so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically how Archie works under the hood is that you created this system that would go to, at 2:00 in the morning, search all these lists, download them to a central location. And when it was going to these servers to find this information, was it servers created only by people at McGill, or was it like across the country? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, it was mostly just the United States, because those were the people that had internet connections. And then then Europe came online. I did sort of radio amateur stuff when I was a teenager, and it had the same kind of feel that these countries would come online, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, Australia is now online, and now Taiwan has now come online, and it was sort of these exotic places would be hooking up to the internet, because back in 1990, Australia didn't have a connection to the internet. Things have changed a lot.
Yes. So this was before the web even existed. So, that was how you were able to find information back then. And do you think that if you didn't create Archie, like it would have been like ridiculously hard for people at McGill and even, just at other schools nearby to find information without something like Archie?
No, well, I mean, once after we had put it out there and made it public and people were using it, that kind of stuff, I started going to conferences and giving talks about it and that kind of stuff because people were interested in the whole idea. And several people came to me and came to Peter and said, hey, we had something similar. We just never put it online. So it wasn't, it's one of those things this happens very often in science and technology, right? The level reaches, it gets to a certain level, and then you think that it causes the same ideas or the same technology or whatever to happen across multiple unconnected group, because the whole tide has lifted all the boats to a certain level, and that all those boats are now thinking, we can now do things that we weren't able to do before because that the technology has reached that level. So it wasn't unique in that sense. We were just first past the post. I mean, we were just the ones that got there first, but it would have happened because there was no way that the internet could have continued along the path that it did without some form of search facility, okay. Because it was getting too large. It was getting too large, and you couldn't, back in my day, when we rode dinosaurs and stuff, when we first connected to the internet, for example, there was no domain name system. So that's the thing that allows you to translate, MIT.edu into an address that you can then go access, right? There was that system didn't exist. If you wanted email to get from me to Berkeley University in California, there was no direct connection between those two things. It would have to do it by hops, right? Because it was a lot of this stuff was done on phone lines. So the phone would pick up the phone, again in the middle of the night, call the other system, transmit the email that it needed to transmit, get the email it needed to get, and then close the phone line down, right? And so in order to know how to get email from you to, say, Berkeley, California, University of California, Berkeley, you had to know every hop along the way. You had to know each one of the hops, and you had to put that in the email address. So you would say, McGill, MIT, University of Kansas, University of wherever it is, and then Berkeley, and all of those were listed in the email address in order to get your email from here to there.
You creating something like Archie, like you really were trying to solve a problem that was like, it was affecting everybody. But at what point did you realize that Archie was doing so much more beyond what you originally intended?
Well, there were two things that happened that really, I mean, we could see the traffic, right? I mean, we could see that, we ended up dedicating a computer, a fairly expensive computer, to handle all the Archie traffic. And again, unbeknownst to the powers that be, right? They weren't aware of what we were doing. And the head of the School of Computer Science at the time was a very proper, very buttoned down Italian professor who always came to work in suits and was very, very proper and so on. And he was, because the European tradition is that you don't call them professor, you call them doctor. Right, so they're all PhDs, and you refer to them as Dr. So-and-so. So he was one of the few people in the whole university that you would refer to as Dr. So-and-so, as opposed to Professor So-and-so. And he went to a conference, and somebody came up to him, one of his peers, somebody at his level, came up to him and said, "Oh, by the way, this project, this Archie project of yours is just amazing. And thank you so much for doing this, because it's really, changed how we work and all this kind of stuff." He had no idea what they were talking about. And so he came back and called us up to his office and said, "So tell me what's going on." It's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission, right? It showed the school in a good light, meant that we were able to continue with it, right? Because people were happy about it, and so we sort of retroactively got permission for it. But so that was one example of seeing the impact on it. And the other one was we had friends so that the CNET is the Canadian network, backbone network that spreads, it's across the country, right? We were talking to them one point. They said, you do know that half the traffic to Eastern Canada, half the internet traffic to Eastern Canada is going to that one machine, right?
Wow.
And they were fudging it as well, because they didn't want their bosses to know either.
How long did Archie, how long was it operational for?
From about 1990 through, there's still one up and running, actually. One was resurrected, actually, yes. You can actually find they're trying to rebuild the Archie network now, just as sort of this retro thing. I was contacted by some guys like 2 years ago, I guess, and they said they had found a copy of the program. And I didn't have a copy. I mean, I didn't have any copies of it. And they said they had found a copy, that they had a guy in Poland still had a copy of the program, and would I give them permission to distribute it? And I was like, yeah. I mean, this is 30 years ago. It has absolutely no value to it. I mean, other than sort of historical, sort of this retro value kind of thing. And so they gave me a copy of it, and I donated it to the Computer History Museum in where are they? San Jose, I think they're in. So they have a copy of. It's not the original, because there have been several iterations since. I don't think anybody has a copy of the original. I mean, it was a little tiny set of scripts, but there was an Archie server up until the 2010s. I think there was still an Archie server running, but again, it was sort of a novelty. It wasn't something that people went to for, to really do serious work on. It was just like, oh, look at this, it's like having a manual typewriter around, it's fun for the novelty of it, but.
So as the web has emerged and search engines like Yahoo and Google came along, what was it like watching your early idea evolve into global platforms like these?
The first set of search engines were very much in the vein of Archie. They were basically text. They looked for text. I mean, in many cases, once the web came along, they would retrieve the actual web page, and you could actually search within the contents of the page, right? Which is what Archie never did that, right? Archie never looked inside the files. It just used the file names as what you searched on, and you, as I said, you hoped that it matched, that the words they were thinking about were the words you were thinking about. So once you had the ability to search within the web page, then of course that expanded it. But it was effectively the same thing, right? It was a text search within a body of data. The thing that was truly revolutionary, and the thing that became and the reason that they are now the most successful search engine ever, is Google. And their brainstorm, which is brilliant, was the idea that in order, it's called PageRank. It's now way more sophisticated than it was when it was originally started. But the idea was to harness how humans valued the data, not just searching it by text. So if you were a butterfly enthusiast, right, and you decided that you were going to put up a website and pour all your knowledge about butterflies, or this one species of butterfly that you know everything about, and you poured all your information onto there, your regular text engine would just search on butterfly, right, or the name of that butterfly or whatever it is. Fine, as far as it goes. But when you then take into account, well, how many people link to this butterfly page? What other web pages link to this butterfly page? And if they do, and if a bunch of them do, well, must be something valuable on that page, right? There must be something interesting on that page that other butterfly sites have linked to your page, right? And so you're harnessing people's evaluation of that butterfly page to say, hey, there's something about this page that makes it interesting and valuable. PageRank then took that into account, right? So it didn't just do the text search and find, all the web pages that said yellow butterfly. It said, which of the pages that say yellow butterfly have lots of links to it, and those are the results that I'm going to put up the top, because a whole bunch of other people have decided that's a valuable source of information, right? And so that's the basis of PageRank. I mean, it's vastly more complicated than it used to be back then, but that's the basic idea. And that was a brilliant way of not just finding the information, but ranking the results in a way that harnessed the evaluations of real human beings making real decisions about what was valuable and what was not valuable. And that's what made Google different from Yahoo and Inktomi and Alta Vista and all these other ones who were basically just doing text searches and saying, hey, counting the number of times the word occurred on the page and using that to rank them, as opposed to this much more intelligent way of evaluating the contents of a page.
Yes. So about that, ranking is so insanely important for search engine optimization. And if you are not, optimizing for search, you're basically invisible online now, which is crazy to think about. And you need to be visible online to get found for many businesses, right? So when you see this, businesses having to compete to be found online through search, does it surprise you how central discoverability has become to commerce?
No, I mean, when you step back from it, and I did a piece on this a few years ago. I wrote a piece somewhere, I don't remember for whom or when, but where I said, when you think about it, search is life. Everything about life, and I mean life, I don't mean online existence, I mean life. You need to be able to think of sort of your hunter-gatherer society, right? We've just sort of layered things on top of that. But at the end of the day, you got to search for food, right? You got to search for water. You got to search for shelter. You got to search for a mate, right? All of these things are search. You don't just sit there and things just land in your lap, right? You have to go out and search. So search is central to just existing for every organism on the face of the earth, right? It doesn't matter if you're a plant, you are searching for nutrients underground, right? It doesn't matter if you're a bacteria, you're searching for something to eat, or, you know, searching for nutrients or whatever it is. Every step that allows you to live requires search. So this is just an extension of that very, very basic necessity in life, right? I mean, I don't care if you're going to a supermarket, you have to know where you have to search for the supermarket. You got to search for the stuff within the supermarket, you know? So life has made that a lot easier. We're not on a savanna in Africa somewhere trying to, you know, dig roots out of the ground or looking for, you know, beehives to get honey. But the concept is the same and has not changed in the 3.7 billion years of life on Earth, right? Search is central to everything. So when you step back and you look at it from that point of view, you realize, yeah, of course it is. Of course, search is going to be central because it's central to everything else. Why would this be any different?
Yes, I love how you put that. I don't think I've ever heard someone talk about it like that. So that's a really great insight. As someone who entered technology decades ago as a Bayesian Canadian pioneer, how have you seen diversity and representation evolve in the industry, and where do you think progress is still needed?
When I've been out of the larger tech world for a long time now, right? I've just done my little thing. When I went to my first Usenix conference, which was a conference, I don't know if it still happens, I don't think it does, which is about the Unix operating system back in 1992. I was one of the few people of color, and I was one of the few openly gay people as well out at the conference. And there were more gay people than there were black people or people of color. But I mean, by far, because it was San Francisco, and it was, you know, it was San Francisco, so it was Silicon Valley, San Francisco, that kind of stuff. So, you know, there were a good, you know, 20 times the number of gay people than there were, you know, people of color. I am sure that is radically different now than it used to be. I am not saying it is where it should be, but in the last 40 years, we have come a long way in terms of representation. Again, I can't speak to what it is right now. If it's anything like the rest of society, we still have a ways to go. And I have no reason to believe that it is any less representative of society than any other group, you know. So from that point of view, I'm sure there's a ways to go, but I think we should at least acknowledge that has changed, right? That doesn't stop us from looking at continued progress and continued inclusion and all that stuff, but keep your eye on the ball, right? Understand that things have improved and hopefully will continue to improve.
Yes. Amazing. Now, last question for you. It's a reflection, kind of legacy question for you. When people look back and say that Archie helped set the stage for modern search and indirectly for everything from Google to digital marketing, how do you personally reflect on that legacy? What do you hope people remember about your role in those early days?
I would say at most I will be a footnote in history. This has been part of my life for so long, and it happened when I was quite young. It's just part of who I am, right? I mean, I don't really go looking for, I'm not the kind of person that goes looking for recognition. I can look back on my career and say I made a difference. I would like to think that it was a positive difference, that it had global impact. I mean, people most people measure that by the amount of money you made. That was never our intent. We were working at the frontier of a new technology, and we were happy to do it. And I was working with the pioneers in the field, people like Tim Berners-Lee and Vint Cerf and all of these people who most people may not even know the names of, but these were the people we were all working towards a common goal. I'm, quite happy with my legacy as it's written. Again, as I said, in 100 years, I'll probably be a footnote and will only appear in a Wikipedia page somewhere,
You are an innovator. You are an amazing person. And it was wonderful talking to you. I'm just so honored to be talking to you today.
I appreciate it. It was fun talking to you as well. And I wish you the best of luck in your various endeavors and projects. And I hope that all works out for you.
What a conversation. Talking with Alan Emtage, the person who created the first free web search engine, is a reminder of how far we've come. How the innovations that we take for granted today started with someone asking, what if? From Archie in 1990 to the AI search engines that's reshaping digital marketing today, the principles remain the same. Make information accessible, make it fast, and make it useful. That's exactly what we're here to do at TechWyse. Whether it's breaking down the latest algorithm updates, explaining emerging technologies, or sitting down with pioneers like Alan who shaped the digital marketing world that we live in every day. We're bringing you the stories, insights, and strategies that matter in digital marketing. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve, hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and join us as we explore what's next in digital marketing and technology. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.